All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining our backyard composting webinar, and I appreciate it. We will be going through all kinds of things today dealing with backyard composting, so hang tight, and hopefully you will walk out of this learning something new and being inspired to continue composting. So I have a couple notes before I jump in. First, as you could tell, we are recording this session, and I will later send it out to everybody who registered for this virtual webinar. And the recording will also be posted to the Hamilton County Resource YouTube channel. The next thing is, if you have questions, we're always happy to answer questions. If you could just please put them in the Q&A box, that would be the most helpful to keep it organized. And my colleague Sam will be helping me answer those questions at the end. I'll leave plenty of time, I promise. Okay, so I'm going to get into the presentation. So what is backyard composting? For those of you who are unfamiliar with this, backyard composting is simply the method of controlling that natural breakdown of all the plant materials in your backyard, mainly fruit and veggie scraps and yard waste. We'll cover a lot today. So we're going to go over the benefits. We're going to go over what can and cannot be composted, how to properly layer your compost and keep it nice and maintained, and how to use the compost when it is ready. There's a lot of benefits to composting, but the number one thing is that you are going to be diverting food and yard waste from the landfill and reducing your carbon footprint by doing so. You'll be recycling all those great nutrients back into the soil and creating a really helpful soil environment. I'm going to take a quick look here at the contents of our landfill. This is Rumpke Landfill, which is out in Colerain right now. And Hamilton County Resource does an audit of what's going into the landfill every 5 years. So we started one in the late summer, early fall of 2023, and we're still getting the data back from that. So the most recent data that I can share with you is from the 2018 study. And in that study, we found that 1/3 of the landfill could have been composted. So if you think about that, it's a good thing because we can actually make a big difference by composting. One of the reasons we don't want food to go to the landfill in the first place is that when it does get put in the landfill, all those plant materials that normally would break down in the soil can't do so in the same way in the landfill. They're packed so tightly in all the layers of trash in the landfill. There's no airflow, no space for oxygen. So they rot anaerobically and release methane gas, which is more than 3 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So it's a very potent greenhouse gas, and we do not want to be putting that in the atmosphere. A not so fun fact is that municipal solid waste landfills are the 3rd largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the United States because of this methane release. Now, when we compost, we are putting the carbon back into the soil, which is a great thing because the carbon is from all the plant materials and they will break down, and that carbon gets back into the soil where it's supposed to be. It actually creates a really healthy soil environment, and carbon allows for the plants. When the plants release carbon, they have a nutrient trade with the mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria that are all around the plant roots. So it's extremely helpful for plants to have that extra carbon in the soil and to really generate that trade system of nutrients. In general, when we've got healthier soil, all the things are better. So it's a whole domino effect. When we have more nutrients in the soil, we have more critters and bugs coming into the soil, which is a good thing because they create lots of burrows, and those burrows help create, air pockets. They aerate the soil, and they create pockets for water absorption, so they can hold the water better in the soil instead of having it run off and be kind of useless every time it rains. So we want good soil absorption, and we want all of that to be working together in the plant root systems. When we have better moisture in the soil and better aeration in the soil can aggregate better. So it holds together more and it reduces erosion. So incredible effects from nutrients in the soil. So how do we get started? What do we do for backyard composting? Well, number one, you want to pick a spot in the backyard that's convenient for you, that you will go and dump your food scraps whenever you need to, and that you'll get there without it being a big chore. You want it to be something that's convenient for you, that you can stick to as a good habit. The only rule for backyard composting is that you don't want to put your compost pile or your compost bin directly up against a live tree or untreated wood. And when I say up against, I mean like you don't want it right up against a live tree or untreated wood, because those organisms that are doing the great decomposition work in your compost pile won't know the difference, and they will start accidentally decomposing the live tree or the untreated wood, and you might not want that. So want to put it at least a few feet away from the live tree, and then you'll be good. Now, if you have treated wood, like a treated wood deck or a treated wood fence, that's not a problem at all. It will not cause any damage to treated wood. So for the next few slides, I'm going to go through what the various structures are that you could use in your backyard for composting. And I'll start with the cheapest and easiest one, and that is a pile. It is free. It's super easy. If you want to get started right now, you can go and put some food scraps in your backyard and cover them with leaves, and that's your pile. That's how you get started. But the issue with a pile for some people, not everybody, but for some people, the issue is that it won't keep animals out. So if you have a dog that really likes to jump in the leaf pile, or if you don't want raccoons or anything digging in your pile, then I would recommend trying something with a little bit more structure. So the next level up would be a wire bin or cage. And these are very inexpensive. Sometimes you can use scraps that you already have laying around, or you can get it at a very discounted price from different hardware stores or garden stores, things like that. So very, very cheap. They have more structure to them, which is great. It can keep some animals out, but not all. So if you still want more structure, the next option is a plastic bin. And at the bottom of the bin, it is totally open. So it's totally open to the soil at the bottom. It basically looks like an upside down trash can. And this will keep most animals out. Very few will be able to get in unless you leave the top open all the time. It's got a twist off top, and it's got a bottom that's sort of like a garage door that you can remove entirely, or you can just lift up when you need to pull out the finished compost at the bottom. Now, because it's got access to the soil, it's very easy for all of the microbes and the worms to get in there and do the job of composting. So it's very nice in that sense. The only thing you'll have to worry about is occasionally you might need to add a little bit of water if you keep it closed. So we'll get to that. We'll talk about all the water. And this bin, if you want to keep in mind, this is the type of bin that is going to be sold at our county bin sale. And I will talk about that again at the end, but this is the bin that we'll be selling. So the next option is a tumbler. The good and bad thing is that it is off the ground, so it keeps all the animals out, which is amazing. But because it's off the ground, it has no access to the soil organisms. So a key thing that you have to do differently for tumblers is you have to get a giant shovel full of soil with worms and bugs in it to get all of those good things into the tumbler so they can do the decomposition of your food scraps. You have to have that element of the soil and the natural organisms who will do the breaking down of your scraps. Just like the plastic bin, the tumbler will need to have water added to it occasionally if it's really dry, just occasionally. Tumblers have an interesting thing. They have a limited capacity because, again, they have no access to the soil. None of it's ever going to break down and seep into the soil. So once it gets about 2/3 full in the tumbler, you want to stop adding anything to it. Stop adding altogether for about 2 weeks to let it rest and break down. Tumblers don't need to be turned as often as you think. That's been a big problem where a lot of people think that they can turn the tumbler every time they walk past it or every time they add food scraps, and you don't need to do that. Tumblers need the time to rest. You only need to turn them maybe once every couple weeks. You want them to be able to rest and actually have the breakdown process happen instead of disturbing it constantly by turning it. The next option is the 3-bin unit. And this one is great. It holds a lot more, obviously, but I don't recommend it unless you have a community garden or an office building or just a huge building that you're trying to compost for. This is what we have at our office at Hamilton County Resource, and it works great. And you don't have to turn it super often. The benefit of this is that in addition to holding a lot, it helps you really understand what the stages are of composting, because once the far left bin gets full, you transfer that to the middle bin, and then you start adding more to the left again. So it has the different stages of breakdown that you can see with your own eyes, and you can see the finished compost would be at the far right once you have enough and it's broken down enough to be good to spread on your garden. You can always make your own compost bin. Whatever materials you have, whatever works, make your own structure, make what works for you. And bonus points if you're able to reuse something that you already have, and you don't even have to go out and buy anything. You just get creative. We love to see that. Okay, so the most important part of this presentation is in the next couple slides. So what you put into compost is everything. It's a big deal what you put into your backyard compost pile because it's sensitive. You have a little compost pile. You don't have a big industrial compost pile. You've got a little compost pile, so you got to take care of it. Make sure you're putting in good stuff. You want roughly 1 part greens for every 3 parts browns in your compost pile. Greens are rich in nitrogen and they are moist. Those are your typical fruit and veggie scraps. That's going to be mostly what they are, is the fruit and veggie scraps and maybe the fresh cut grass or freshly cut plants. Your browns are very rich in carbon and they provide the dry element. So those are going to be more like leaves, sawdust, wood chips, mostly things from a tree, if you want to think about it that way. So 1 part greens for every 3 parts browns. You need that balance of moisture and dryness. So some examples of greens on this slide are, of course, fruit scraps like banana peels and apple cores, tons of veggie scraps if you think of onion peels, potato peels, broccoli tops, whatever you want to think of. All those fruit and veggie scraps are great to go in the compost. You can also see the fresh cut grass. You can see some of the wilted flowers maybe that you don't want to have in a vase anymore that you cut in your garden. All those can go in the greens section, the greens layer of your compost. A little more unique ones are eggshells. They're very rich in nitrogen. I know they're not a plant material, but they're one of the few exceptions that we have that can go in. And coffee grounds, again, very, very rich in nitrogen. Those can go in. And remember, they're the color brown, but they are a green in this case because they are so rich in that nitrogen. You also have tea bags. So any paper tea bags with a cotton string can go in. They're fully natural. Make sure you don't put the little silky ones in. Those are unfortunately not organic. They cannot go in the compost pile. The final thing, if you see on here, is pet hair or human hair. So if you have a dog or cat, or you yourself shed a lot, put that hair in the compost pile because, again, it is rich in nitrogen. We have a ton of examples of browns here, and I really want to emphasize that even though leaves are the standard brown, and they're probably the easiest to access in the fall, of course, they are not the only option for a brown. So if you don't have leaves, don't panic. There are other options. We have shredded paper, newspaper, cardboard, torn up cardboard, paper towels, wood chips, twigs, dried pine needles, sawdust, and dried brown grass. If you remember, the green grass is a green, but the dried brown grass is a brown. They're chemically different. So a good option for you if you are running low on browns is to let your green grass dry out and become a brown, and then you can use it as a brown to cover your food scraps. You do not want to compost bones or meat or dairy products or grease or plastic or dog or cat manure. We really want to stay away from those items because, first of all, they are not a plant-based material. They're not organic in that sense, and they can't break down in the same way. And the other reason is that they smell really bad, and they will attract all kinds of pests that you do not want near your garden or your backyard, home, wherever it is that you have a compost pile. You don't want to attract those pests, and you don't want it to smell bad. I often get the question if you can compost herbivore waste because they eat only plants. The answer is yes. So if you live on a farm or know somebody who does and has these animals, definitely they can compost their animal manure. But a thing to remember is that, again, even though it's brown, it is super rich in nitrogen because of all the plants that they just processed. So remember that it is a green. If you're going to put it in your compost, it goes in the green portion, and it needs to be covered by some kind of browns. Another question I get asked a lot is the ratio of the 1 greens to 3 browns, is that by weight or by volume? And the answer is it's by volume, because that would be very difficult to achieve by weight ratio. You would have to have way too many browns for it to be possible. So this is not an exact science. You simply want to fully cover your greens that you put into your pile, cover them with browns. And that goes for if you put 1 banana peel in your pile, you cover it with just a few leaves or whatever few paper scraps that you need to, and you're good. But if you dump a whole bucket of fruit and veggie scraps, then you're gonna need to compensate and fully cover it with whatever browns you have on hand. So it doesn't matter how many greens you put in at a time, you just want to make sure that they are covered with browns. So if you are starting from scratch, here's how I would recommend doing your layers. So to start, you might want to put some chunky browns at the bottom to create some air pockets. Give that chimney effect and start the airflow from the bottom, from the get-go. That's a great thing. We want to keep it aerated. Now, when I say chunky browns, I know that sounds weird, but twigs or potentially wood chips, things that maybe are a little more choppy at the bottom, I would put those browns at the bottom. And then you get to add your first layer of greens. So go in with some fruit and veggie scraps or maybe some lawn clippings, and that adds your first layer of moisture and nitrogen. Then you want to cover it fully in browns. That's going to be your leaves or paper towels or shredded paper, sawdust, whatever you might have. And that helps balance out the moisture with the dryness. And the browns also help to reduce the smell anytime you cover those food scraps. It just helps keep the smell down. It shouldn't be a big smell in the first place, but it always helps to cover them with browns. The other thing that the browns do is they help insulate the pile. They help trap that heat from within. The heat is actually being generated by the worms and the millipedes and the beetles and the roly-polies that are inside doing the work and breaking down the food scraps. So they're reproducing and they're expending their energy, and they are generating the heat in the pile. So the browns help insulate that. People ask me all the time, and this is a very valid question, how do you have enough browns? Especially when it's not the fall and you don't have as many leaves as you could possibly want. So here's a few strategies. Fall is ideal, of course. We want to gather everybody's leaves and get as many as possible for ourselves and store them up. My best recommendation is to have a spot or maybe even a cage or a bin in your backyard where you hold browns. It's a little browns storage bin somewhere in your backyard, and it will help make it very, very convenient for you to cover your food scraps in browns. Every time you go out to dump food scraps, you don't have to even think about it. You just grab a handful or a shovelful from the browns pile and dump it over your food scraps. I want it to make it convenient for you, so this is extremely important. If you can, store up those browns in a good space in your backyard. I also recommend having a little brown storage spot inside, because you're going to have shredded newspaper, maybe shredded paper, shredded documents. You might have brown paper towels or other paper towels that are unbleached. You might have napkins, or you could have something like the bottom of a greasy pizza box. All of those things, napkins, paper towels, and a pizza box, those shouldn't be recycled, especially if the pizza box is greasy. We don't want to recycle a greasy pizza box, but you can recycle the clean part. So what do you do with the greasy part? Instead of putting it in the trash, you can put it in your compost bin. With napkins, paper towels, and the greasy pizza box, you want to make sure they're kind of shredded up a little bit and help them break down before they go into the compost pile. A big concern is rodents. What do we do about rodents? Are there going to be any? If there are, how do we fix it? Rodents like hiding in these undisturbed, quiet spaces. So the biggest thing that you can do to deter the rodents from coming anywhere near your compost pile is to be out and about in your yard a lot. Maybe you just go out and dump your food scraps every couple days. That's great. Maybe you just go out and take a little walk around the compost pile every day. Great. Just make sure it stays disturbed. We want to make sure that they don't think that they can get all cozy and make a nest and stay there quietly. You want to make sure that you know that you're out there and doing some things in the yard and disturbing them. So remove any clutter from around your compost pile and just be out there frequently if you can. I had mentioned this a little bit earlier. You might need to add water on occasion to your compost bin. You want your compost to be damp, and that's a very broad term. You don't want it to be crumbly and dry, but you also don't want it to be a muddy mess. You want it somewhere in between, and that's a wide range. So you're probably going to be okay. But if you want to test it, take a handful of your compost and squeeze it between your fist. If you get a little trickle of water outside your knuckles, that's great. There's some moisture in there. And if you open your hand and find that the compost stays in that shape, then you're good. It'll be kind of like Play-Doh. So you want it to have that moisture in it. If you feel like it's crumbly and dry, then add some hose water to it. Give it a little dampness. That's good. You might have to do that, especially in August, maybe July, if we have one of those dry spells. We also want to provide air. And again, I'll emphasize this. We don't want it to be like the landfill, where there's no oxygen flow and it releases methane gas. We're trying to avoid that. So make sure you aerate your pile. And this does not have to be a frequent thing that you do. You don't have to do it every single time. You can do it once every 2 weeks if you want to. It's completely up to you. I recommend doing it no more than once a week. You do not need to turn it more than once a week. When I say turn it, that could be a variety of things. You could take a little pitchfork or stick and like stir it like a brew, or you could take a pitchfork and kind of fluff it a little bit, turn it around. You don't have to take all the bottom bits and put them to the top. You don't have to do that. You just want to get some airflow going in your compost bin. There's a little tool here called a wing digger that goes up and down, and it kind of disturbs the compost and fluffs it up a little bit on the inside. I've also seen a few people stick old PVC pipes through their compost to give it some airflow. And that's a little bit more of a passive way to give it airflow if you prefer. You do not have to turn in the wintertime. So yay, you can be a little lazy in the wintertime. All you do is put your greens down and then cover them with browns. Just do your greens covered with browns, keep doing that layering process, and don't turn it. We don't want to freeze those poor little bugs out who are doing their job. You need them, and they need to survive to do that. You will know if your compost is working if it is heated up. If you feel some heat coming off of it, that's a great sign. That means all those critters on the inside are doing the work. It may or may not get up to 130 degrees or 160 degrees. Sometimes it's just going to take a while. If you've got a small family or it's just you at home composting, it might take a while, and that's okay. If you've got more volume and you're doing the layers more quickly, then it will probably generate heat faster. There is such a thing as a compost thermometer, and it looks very much like a turkey or meat thermometer that you just stick into the pile and you can see the reading. If you want to do that, great. I think they're no more than about $20. So if you want to invest in that, go for it, but you do not have to. Don't stress about the heat. For a quick troubleshooting, we're going to do a quick summary of what we've gone over. So if your pile smells bad, add some browns to it. Maybe it needs a little bit more balance, or aerate the pile. Give it a good turn. Maybe it just needs some airflow. So airflow and browns if it smells bad. If it is too dry, add your greens for moisture or add some water from the hose. If it is too wet, add some browns or maybe give it more exposure to the sun. Maybe let it open a little bit, give it more exposure to the sun so it can evaporate. If it's not hot enough, add more and be patient. Just keep doing your greens covered with browns. If you keep doing your layers, it's eventually going to work, I promise. Eventually, it will be time to harvest your finished compost. And when that happens, it could be a broad range. It could be ready within a few weeks, and it could take 6 months. It's going to take some time. And if you have a larger garden that you want to spread it on, it's going to take more time to generate enough to do that. When you feel like it's time to harvest some of the compost, you'll see that it's starting to look like dark, rich soil. And it'll be a little bit moist, just like you want it. But if it's got some chunks in it, maybe it's got some avocado peels or peach pits or something, just throw those back in and they'll eventually decompose in the pile. So sift it out a little bit, get the stuff that feels good and ready to spread on your garden. And we're going to treat it like mulch. So remember, compost is not soil itself. It's a soil additive. Think of it as a fertilizer. It goes into the soil to provide nutrients. But it's a much better option. Keep it natural if you can. That's why we love compost. It provides all the good stuff without maybe extra chemicals that you don't want. Compost is rich, so a little bit goes a long way in your gardens. Whether you have fruits and veggie gardens or flower gardens, compost will be equally beneficial for them. You want to spread it like mulch about 1 inch thick over your topsoil. You can mix it into that top layer if you want to, but you don't have to. And if you want to put it in potted plants or above ground plants, then sprinkle it. You don't need to add that much, just sprinkle it. A little tip is that if you want it to absorb a little faster into the soil and be a bit more effective at getting in there and really giving your plants the nutrients as fast as possible, I would wait to spread your compost on your soil until it's going to be a rainy day later on. So wait for a storm and spread it right before the storm, or you could just take a garden hose and sprinkle it after you spread that compost. Really get it down in the soil. Okay, so now we're at some of the little bits of resources and QR codes coming up. Bear with me. If you are interested in purchasing one of those plastic bin structures that I talked about earlier, we are selling these right now in our Hamilton County Resource Compost Bin sale. It's done online through this QR code on the slide, and the pickups are by appointment only. Pickups will be at Winton Woods, and the address is on the website, so you can see exactly where you would have to go to pick up your bin. But these bins are an amazing price right now. They're $50 per bin, and they're 80-gallon bins. So these are big. They're fantastic for anybody starting out or who just wants to do more with composting. These structures are wonderful, and they're about 3 feet tall and 3 feet wide. So they're a great size, and they've got that removable top, they've got the removable bottom, and they come in multiple pieces. So you can put them in your car easily, and then you can set them up at home in your yard. So if you're interested, check them out at that QR code right here. I have more links. So we have the Hamilton County Resource website and Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, all linked here at this QR code. In addition to a unique little resource called Compi, it is a smart sensor app that helps you compost more efficiently. It's kind of like a compost coach, and it tells you what's needed in your compost, whether it's more water, more air, whatever that may be. And it was started by a local father-daughter duo. They did this little startup, and she began during her 8th grade science project to do this. So it's been a really cool process for them, and they are testing out their little Compi sensor, and they received an innovation grant for their work and testing this out from Resource. So wanted to give them a little shout out. Finally, if you are interested in local composting services, or you have a family member who has an apartment, or backyard composting just isn't the option right now, local composting services here in Hamilton County, we have 5 of them. They're all fantastic, and they do different monthly subscription options where you can drop off your food scraps at designated spots and get another bucket to fill with food scraps. I also have my contact information on here. So if you scan this QR code, you'll get my email and phone number, and you are welcome to contact me at any point. In fact, I encourage it. If you want to share success stories of your compost or share photos and say, what's happening? What am I doing wrong? How can I fix this? If you want to troubleshoot with me, just give me a call or send me an email. Let me know. I'm more than happy to work with you. I'm more than happy to give you more resources and share different videos and tips and tricks with you. So please contact me if you would like to. And I believe that brings us to the end, but if you would like to stay on, if you asked questions or you want to hear the questions and hear the answers, I'm going to go through the questions right now. So Sam, are there any questions that you feel are going to be useful to answer right now?
So I do not have visibility to those questions, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well, then let me get in here. I'm promoting you to panelist as well. There we go. And I can see some of these questions. So one person said, can paper coffee filters also be added? Yes, absolutely. You can add those paper coffee filters. In fact, if you want to just take the coffee in the filters and just walk it over to the compost and dump it in, that's absolutely fine. Since the paper is natural, you can compost it. Ooh, Naomi is asking, what about colored or treated hair? Can you put that in the compost bin? This can be a little bit of a personal choice, Naomi. So if the compost, once it's finished, if the compost is ready to be used on the garden, if you have a flower garden, I would say you can absolutely put colored or treated hair in that compost. However, if you want to use it for a veggie or fruit garden that you'll eventually be eating those plants, then maybe don't put colored and treated hair in the compost, if that makes sense. And that goes for fertilized grass and plants as well. I would recommend that you don't put any treated plants or hair in the compost if you're going to be eating the fruits and veggies that the compost gets spread on if you have a garden. You can absolutely use egg cartons as brown matter. Allison, that was a great question. Egg cartons are a fantastic brown. I would just recommend tearing them up a little bit to help them get going a little faster when it comes to breakdown. Okay. What else? Naomi has asked about, what about color new print, like flyers? Okay, so if you have glossy paper, I would not put glossy paper in the compost bin, but if it's like a little bit of color on a printed paper or a newspaper, even like the comics in the newspaper, that's okay. Just tear it up a little bit. Again, help it decompose faster. Naomi, I appreciate you coming to today's workshop. And you can still continue to get all this knowledge and keep going with your compost. If you want to make changes to your compost, absolutely go for it. Hopefully this will be helpful and you can take some stuff with you. Catherine has asked, how do you sparse out the compost that is ready to use when you're using the pile method? Good question, Catherine. So the idea is that the stuff that has been that's spent the most time breaking down is going to be at the bottom of the pile or at the bottom of the bin because it's in the smallest pieces. That's not always going to be the perfect case, but everything, when I recommend turning the pile, I had forgotten to say this earlier, that's my bad. When you go out to dump your newest food scraps, if you are going to turn it and give it some air that day, best to turn it before adding your newest food scraps. That way you keep the stuff that has been already cooking in there a little bit, you keep it towards the bottom and the newest stuff still stays on the top. So that's how we want to try to keep the broken down stuff towards the bottom, and you pull it out from the bottom. And Catherine has also asked, what time of year do you sprinkle compost on a vegetable garden? Anytime you want. And that's truly anytime you want. I think spring is fantastic, but you can sprinkle it on at any time of the year.
Hey, Elise, looks like there's a question of how much do you have to tear up paper or cardboard to put it in your compost?
How much is an interesting question. This is up to you. So if you think about it this way, it will break down faster if it goes in smaller. So if you want it to go a little bit faster, I would tear up the paper at least a few times, at least into quarters before you put it in. And same with the cardboard, I would tear it up at least into quarters before tearing it in, or before putting it in, sorry. Okay.
There is also a question, what are your thoughts on keeping a tumbler or bin in a garage?
You can definitely keep a tumbler or bin in the garage, but I think it's best to keep it outside. The I know people who keep it indoors, and that's totally fine. There's not going to be much of a smell, so that's positive. You can keep it inside if you want to, but I think keeping it outside helps with the the natural element. If you want to take it that way, you can leave it open sometimes if you want the rain to come in, or if you need it to evaporate, if it's a little too moist, you can have the sunshine evaporate it a little bit. I think it's helpful to have it outside, but it is absolutely possible to keep it inside if you maintain it pretty well and kind of keep a close eye on it. I'm losing track of my things here. So I just showed the slide to purchase the bin, and I'll keep it on there.
Do bins work on uneven ground?
Ooh, yes, they can absolutely still work on an even ground. And Naomi, maybe you can specify, are you thinking like bumpy ground, or are you thinking like a hill, like an incline? I'm not sure. If it's on a hill, it might be a little trickier, but if it's on bumpy ground, it'll still be fine. It might be a little wobbly at times, but I think it should still be fine. If it's a slight incline, it's okay. I'm thinking if it's a steep incline, it might topple over, but a slight incline would be okay.
What about, are compostable bags for scrap collection okay to put in a composter, or should that bag be emptied?
Ooh, okay, compostable bags are okay to put in the composter, but I have heard that some brands do not break down very quickly and they can just kind of get stuck in the compost. So I think it might be the best option to just empty the bag and try to reuse it as much as possible before you put it totally in the compost bin. By that point, it will probably be ready to break down in the compost bin. I see somebody asking about cereal boxes. So cereal boxes, you can put in the compost bin if you tear them up, but the best option for cereal boxes is to recycle them. Those will get recycled very easily. Cardboard is kind of a hot commodity in the recycling world at this point. So probably best to recycle your cereal boxes, especially if they have like the shinier print on the outside. And I saw a question at some point about the website for the bins. Oh, okay. Vicky, the website for the bins is Hamilton County Resource or Hamilton County Composter Sale.org. Let's see if I can get that up for you. Sam or Gage, are you able to send that link in the chat by chance?
Yeah, we're sending right now.
Perfect. Thank you, Gage. So we'll get you that compost bin sale link in the chat right now. And okay, oops, I see another question. We mentioned napkins and paper towels. Are any compostable, and how to know which are and which aren't? Also, are tissues and Kleenex okay? Okay, so this can be a little bit tricky. So napkins and paper towels, if they are brown and unbleached, they're totally fine to compost. If they are natural and don't have bleach, that's your number one. You can for sure compost those napkins and paper towels. But if they have chemicals, for example, if they are the Kleenex with Puffs Plus or Vicks or one of those with the special lotion in them, those should not be composted because they have various chemicals in them. But if they are just the natural, like regular old tissues, those can be composted. Even paper towels that are, white, the classic paper towels, those can still go in the compost. They just won't break down as fast and as easy as the brown paper towels and napkins. The only one I for sure would not compost is the Kleenex with the lotion or the fancier, softer smells in them.